This is a continuation from lesson 2, problem of existence. It would make sense to watch that first before watching this. And so we'll start with this. We had something to the effect of, let's see, is like a chair. We did a chair. Chair exists because its molecules exist. So we had something like that, and then the molecules exist because atoms exist. So chair derives its existence from existence of molecules. Molecules derive their existence from the existence of atoms. Atoms derive their existence from existence of electrons, protons, and neutrons. And then these derive their existence from quarks, but not electrons. So I suppose we'll do this. And then these derive their existence from some quantum fields. And this is as far as we know today. Where do the quantum fields derive their existence from? We don't really know. But let's suppose for the sake of the argument that the story continues, and so maybe there's something else, and then maybe that something else derives its existence from something else, and then from something else, and so on. Now, if we never reach the source of existence, then nothing in this series should presumably exist, since everything here derives its existence from something else. But if we never hit the actual source of existence, the origin that actually has existence, then it looks like nothing should exist. But since something exists, then there must be the source that has the existence itself. So existence is in it, and then this existence is just passed along this whole series. So it just goes like that, right? Backwards all the way to the chair, and we have a chair. That's what we did last time. And then what we also established was that the argument tries to establish that there couldn't be multiple origins because that wouldn't work out. So you can only have one, is what the argument claims. Now, here's an interesting thing that you could say. Let's maybe get rid of the blue. What if you have something like this? What if the series looks like a little different of this derivation of the existence, where you start with the chair, and then you move to, molecules, and then to atoms, and then to electrons, protons, neutrons, and then to quarks. I'm just going to put Q for quarks. Maybe I should spell quarks. And then you end up with some quantum fields, and the story goes on, and goes on, and goes on. And let's say that it just goes indefinitely. So let's say it runs and runs, and it just runs to infinity. Now you could say, well, if that's the case, then you never hit the origin, and so there's nothing from which the existence comes, and so nothing should exist, right? But you could say, well, it seems like you could have this whole series here that runs to infinity, and then the source of existence or the origin of existence could just be outside of it. So maybe the origin is just outside and sits here. Oh, and it has the actual existence. And perhaps this origin grants existence to, this thing here. And then from this, the existence goes in this direction, all the way to the chair, so we have a chair. And maybe somehow it goes in the other direction as well. Right? And so then perhaps this is actually what you have, where the origin is not at the very beginning somewhere, but it's just simply outside of the series. Seems to be a possibility. And then of course you could run something similar with second chair, and then you have a second. So maybe this would be O1, first origin, and then you could do something very similar, something like what we did with the previous video, where you have same story. So I'll speed this up a little, like that, because we've already done this. And then this thing runs to infinity, but then you'd say, but here's a second origin O2 that grants the existence to, maybe, let's put something here. Let's maybe like do a question mark. That gives existence to maybe this element in a series, and then from this element in a series, the existence travels in both directions. So maybe it travels in this direction and in this direction. I'm not sure if you can actually travel in this direction, but let's just say you can. So you have the second origin of existence And so on. You could do the third one, fourth one, fifth one. But then what you would do is something very similar to what we did in the previous video, where you would say, well, if you have multiple origins of existence, then they would have to have some kind of a differentiating feature. And by the fact that they would have a differentiating feature, from that we would derive that these origins here, O1 and O2, are made out of parts. But if they're made out of parts, then they have existence in a derivative way, namely from their parts. And so somehow you could probably argue at this point that well, these can't be the true origins, maybe some intermediate origins, but not true origins. They would have to come from some actual origin that is not made of any parts, so that it actually has the very existence, and that existence is not derived from the parts. And if that's the case, then there can be only one, and so on. Now, that seems to be a possibility. The only thing is that, if anything, this might help the theistic position, because if you place the origin outside of the series of material things, and here we have a series, this is a series of material things, and if that series runs to infinity, then you exhaust all of the possible things within a series of material things, which means that the origin would have to be immaterial. So if anything, if this is the position somebody would want to take, then they would establish here that they'd be trying to establish here that the origin must be immaterial. And so this is already one of the steps towards towards the argument that there's this being that is immaterial, all powerful, all knowing, and so on and so forth, and has existence that grants existence to everything else. So if anything, we would probably well, it's a possibility, but it's a possibility that seems to be helping the position of a theist. So anyways, we'll go back to this here, where you start the series and you run the series and you end up with the origin of existence. And whether you take this type of a series or whether you take this type of a series here, you still end up with one origin, or you seem to end up with one origin right here. All right, so that's as a side, that's a side note somewhere on the side, and it's kind of a review and reminder of what we did last time anyways. So what I want to do is take it from a specific case and bring it to a more general case, and show you the argument that is called the argument from contingency and necessity. Right, so we want to end up with in that place. What we've done with this chair and this whole series here, that presumably ends in some origin of existence O, is we said that the chair derives its existence from molecules, molecules derive their existence from atoms, and so on and so forth. So we had a statement where an object, and then specifically we took chair, derives or actually I want to write it a little differently. An object has existence in a derivative way right, chair has an existence in a derivative way from, and then molecules have an existence in a derivative way from, and then atoms have existence in a derivative way from, and so on and so forth. So we're going to define something here. An object has existence in a derivative, an object which, I'm gonna put here which has existence in a derivative way, is what we would call a contingent being. All right, so now you know what a contingent being is. A chair is a contingent being because it derives its existence from something else. molecules are contingent beings because they derive their existence from something else, and so on. Yeah, a house is a contingent being. Human person is a contingent being because it derives its existence from from its parts, and so on. Generally speaking, anything that is made out of parts is going to be a contingent being because it derives its existence from its parts. And so what we can also do here is we can from here what we can say is that well, an object which has existence in a derivative way is a contingent being, and then we can well, all right, so an object that has existence not in a derivative way is a necessary being, right? So an object which a being really, but I guess I think being would be more appropriate, but we'll go with an object which has existence not in a derivative way is what we call in philosophy a necessary. Ooh, how do you spell necessary? Necessary being. I think I misspelled necessary. But anyway, so what we have now is the definition of a contingent being. I want it blue. Contingent being and necessary being. And now at this stage, I can show you an actual argument in philosophy of religion that is being debated. Right? It's the argument from contingency and necessity. If I just told you at the beginning of this unit, here's an argument from contingency and necessity, and we looked at it, you wouldn't really understand what it was saying. But now I think you have a good foundation. Right? So you know what a contingent being is. It's something that has a existence in a derivative way. An example of that would be molecules or atoms or electrons or protons or neutrons. A necessary being is a being that has existence not in a derivative way. Now, if it doesn't have existence in a derivative way, then it also cannot be made out of parts, right? Cannot have any parts. Okay, I shouldn't even put be made because that sort of implies something, but cannot have any parts. Right? Because if it had parts, then it would have existence in a derivative way from its parts. So it cannot have any parts. And because it cannot have any parts, presumably it could be only one, right? Because if there were more than one, then there would have to be some kind of a differentiating feature, and by having that feature, it would have to be composed of that distinctive feature and existence itself. And so it has parts, and so it derives its existence from its parts, the existence of its parts, and so in that sense, it would be a contingent being, not a necessary being. So necessary being, if it does exist, there's only one. So let's so now that we have the definitions behind us, let's look at the actual argument. I'm going to show you the argument, and then let's see what you think about it. So I'm going to copy paste somewhere. Let's go this way. So here's the argument from contingency and necessity, and there are two parts to it. I have this in a worksheet that I've given you. It's almost at the end. This is taken from Stanford, and I literally just copy and pasted this stuff, but I'm going to read through this, and then I want you to think about this part itself. All it does here is it argues, this part of the argument argues that there is a necessary being. And what I showed you is a way to maybe argue for it in a slightly different way from, we went from chair to molecules and so on and so forth, and I showed you that, but this is a more general way of arguing for the existence of a necessary being. So contingent being exists. Premise one, contingent being exists. Now you know what that is. That's it. That's effectively saying a chair exists. The contingent being has a cause of its existence, right? It derives its existence from something. That existence comes from somewhere. So contingent being has a cause of its existence. Now, the problem here doesn't say whether that existence is derived from its parts or whether it comes from some event in the past and so on. It doesn't specify that, so it could be either one or the other option here that the argument is pursuing for, but that's kind of irrelevant. It's just saying that the contingent being, by the definition of what it is, gets its existence from somewhere. All right, the next step is the cause of, or the explanation of its existence is something other than the contingent being itself. Right? Nothing can make itself exist. That's just not possible. I cannot make myself exist because then I would be prior to myself in some sense. Not necessarily in time, but certainly in some more fundamental way. I cannot cause myself to be. For what causes or explains the existence of this contingent being must either be solely other contingent beings or include a non-contingent being. Right? Now, contingent beings alone cannot provide an adequate causal account or explanation for the existence of a contingent being, because then you run into this series, right? If the cherry derives its existence from the molecules from atoms from something else from something else, something else from something else, if that never ends, then we never reach the source of existence, and so nothing should really exist. That's what this thing is saying here. 5, the fifth point in the argument. And so 6, therefore, what causes or explains the existence of this contingent being must include a non-contingent being, and that would be a necessary being by definition. So this argument just argues for the existence of a necessary being. All right, something for you to think about. I think this argument may make may be easier to grasp, given that you have considered the series of the problem of existence as presented in the previous video. So I think we'll probably stop here, and then in the next video I'm going to show you how philosophers that specialize in philosophy of religion will try to take this necessary being, or this origin of existence, and show that it has these attributes of being immutable, all-powerful, all-knowing, immaterial, and so on, and then label it as God. But that's going to come, I think, in the next video.